My name is Lily. I want you to listen carefully to my story. Do not miss a single part because this story is very close to my heart. It is filled with emotions, mistakes, and lessons that will make you think deeply about love, life, and the choices we make. I was 23 years old when I first met him. His name was Ryan. He had the warmest smile and eyes that seemed to hold secrets I wanted to know. He was kind, charming, and funny. He made me feel special. Every time he spoke, I felt like I was the only person in the world. I had never felt that way before. We started talking every day. Morning texts, late night calls, and sweet messages in between. I felt happy, alive, and loved. My friends told me I was glowing, and I believed it was because of him. One evening, he took me to a quiet park. The sun was setting, painting the sky with orange and pink colors. He held my hand and looked into my eyes. "Lily, you make me the happiest man in the world," he said softly. "Will you marry me?" My heart skipped a beat. Tears filled my eyes. I felt like I was in a dream. Without thinking twice, I said, "Yes." We got married 6 months later. It was a small but beautiful wedding. My family and friends were there, and everything seemed perfect. I thought I had found my forever, but forever didn't last long at first. Everything was beautiful. We would laugh, hold hands, and talk about silly things. We would cook together, dance in the kitchen, and fall asleep in each other's arms. It was like living in a fairy tale. But slowly, things began to change. He started coming home late. When I asked him where he was, he would say he was working. I believed him. I trusted him because I loved him. Then, he started losing his temper over small things. If I forgot to put salt in the food or left the light on, he would get angry. He never hit me, but his words did. They cut deep. One night, he came home very late. His eyes were cold, and his voice was distant. I asked him if he was okay. He didn't look at me. "Just leave me alone, Lily," he said sharply. I felt a sting in my chest, but I stayed quiet. I didn't want to fight. I thought maybe he was just stressed, but it didn't stop. Days turned into weeks, and his love slowly turned into silence. We sat at the same table but barely spoke. We shared a bed but felt miles apart. I cried alone at night. I missed him, even though he was right beside me. I kept thinking, where did I go wrong? One evening, I made his favorite dinner. I lit candles and wore the dress he once said made me look beautiful. I wanted to bring back the love we had. When he came home, he barely looked at the table. He didn't even notice the candles. He just sat down and stared at his phone. "Ryan," I said softly, "I made your favorite food." He didn't respond. I placed my hand over his, but he pulled away. "Why are you doing this?" He asked coldly. Tears filled my eyes. Because I love you, I whispered. He let out a sigh and stood up. I need some air. And he left. I sat there, staring at the empty chair. My heart felt like it was breaking into tiny pieces. The next morning, I found his phone on the kitchen counter. I knew I shouldn't look, but my hands moved on their own. My heart was pounding. My fingers were shaking. And then I saw it. Messages from another woman. Sweet words, late night plans, and pictures. That crushed me. My knees gave out, and I sat on the floor. My hands covered my face as I sobbed. When he came home, I showed him the messages. I was shaking. My voice was barely a whisper. Who is she? I asked. He didn't look guilty. He didn't even look sorry. His eyes were cold. Lily, I don't love you anymore, he said, his voice flat and emotionless. I've wanted to leave for months. I just didn't know how. I felt my heart shatter into pieces. My legs felt weak, and I fell back onto the couch. The man I once loved, the man I trusted with my whole heart, stood in front of me, speaking words that cut through me like a knife. I regret marrying you, he said with a cruel calmness. I could barely breathe. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I sat there, frozen, while he packed his bag and walked out the door. Days passed. I barely ate. My eyes were swollen from crying. My heart felt empty, broken beyond repair. I blamed myself. I wondered if I had loved him too much, if I had been too kind, too soft. I questioned everything, but slowly, time did what it does best. It healed me. I started walking in the park again. I felt the sun on my face and listened to the birds sing. I read books and painted. I rediscovered the pieces of me that I had lost in that broken marriage. And one day, I stood in front of the mirror and smiled at my reflection. It was not a sad smile, it was a smile of strength. I learned that loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself. I learned that sometimes we fall for the wrong person, but it doesn't mean we stop believing in love. I don't regret loving him. I don't regret the memories we shared, but I regret losing myself in the process. Now, I am stronger, I am wiser, and I know that one day, love will find me again. But this time, I will not lose myself. I will love with my whole heart, but I will never forget to love myself first. So, my dear listener, if this story touched your heart, let it be a reminder. Love is beautiful, but it should never make you lose yourself. You deserve kindness, respect, and happiness. Never settle for less. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think, then like this story and subscribe. I will keep sharing more stories that will touch your heart, make you feel deeply, and remind you of the beauty and lessons in life. And remember, you are worthy of a love that makes you feel whole, not one that leaves you in pieces. Months turned into a year, and with each passing day, I grew stronger. The broken pieces of my heart were slowly coming back together. They were not perfect, but they were mine. I learned to carry the scars of that love with grace. One afternoon, I walked to the same park where Ryan had once proposed to me, the park where I had once dreamed of forever. I sat on a wooden bench under a tall oak tree. The wind gently brushed against my face, and I closed my eyes. I thought about him. I no longer felt angry. I no longer felt sad. Instead, I felt free. I opened my eyes and saw an elderly couple walking hand in hand. Their steps were slow, but their grip was strong. The man smiled at the woman, as if he were still falling in love with her after all those years. She leaned her head against his shoulder with a soft, contented smile. I stared at them, feeling a strange warmth in my chest. I didn't feel jealous. I didn't feel bitter. Instead, I felt hopeful. One day, I thought, I will have that too. And when I do, it will be with someone who loves me the way I deserve. As I stood up to leave, I saw a little girl chasing a butterfly. Her giggles filled the air. She had pigtails and wore bright yellow shoes. She stumbled and fell, but instead of crying, she laughed. She got back up, dusted her knees, and kept running after the butterfly. I smiled. That little girl reminded me of something important. Falling down does not mean you stay down. You get up. You try again. Later that evening, I sat by my window with a cup of tea. The stars were scattered across the sky. I remembered the night Ryan left. I had stared at this same sky, wondering if I would ever feel whole again. But now, looking at those same stars, I realized something. I was whole all along. I didn't need Ryan to complete me. I was not a half. I was always a whole. And that was when I truly let him go. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with peace. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk. The air was crisp, and the sun painted the sky in soft gold. As I walked, I heard someone call out, "Excuse me, miss." I turned around. A man was jogging toward me. His hair was messy, and he had a bright smile. He held out my scarf, which must have fallen from my bag. "This fell," he said, slightly out of breath. I smiled and took the scarf. "Thank you." His eyes were kind. There was something familiar about his warmth, the same warmth I once saw in Ryan when we first met. But this time, I didn't let my heart race. I didn't lose my breath. I simply smiled, thanked him again, and walked away. I was no longer afraid of love. I knew that someday, when the time was right, love would find me again. But this time, I would be different. I would be stronger, wiser, and softer all at once. That evening, I sat by my window again, watching the sunset paint the sky with its gentle colors, and I whispered to myself, "I am proud of you, Lily." because I was. I was proud of the woman who once cried herself to sleep but now slept peacefully. Proud of the woman who once begged for love but now gave it to herself. And that's when I knew I didn't regret marrying him anymore. I didn't regret the pain, because without it, I wouldn't have found myself. Sometimes we meet people who break us so that we can build ourselves back stronger. Sometimes love leaves us so that we can find the greatest love of all the love we have for ourselves. So, my dear listener, if you are holding on to someone who makes you feel small, if you are chasing love that makes you question your worth, let them go. You are whole on your own. You are enough. And one day, love will come. The right kind of love. The kind that feels like home. The kind that holds your hand without making you feel weak. The kind that stays. The seasons changed, and so did I. The leaves turned golden and fell from the trees. Just as I had once let my pain fall away. Winter came, cold and quiet, but my heart was no longer frozen. By spring, the flowers bloomed again, and so did I. I found joy in the smallest things. I laughed with strangers. I smiled at the morning sun. I took myself out for coffee, sat by the window, and watched the world move. I felt free, lighter than I had in years. One day, I walked by a bookstore. The window displayed a sign, poetry, reading tonight. I had always loved poetry. When I was younger, I used to write little poems in my notebook, soft, silly verses about love and life. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped. Maybe it was because my heart felt too heavy to create. That night, I decided to go. The small bookstore was filled with people, their faces gentle and curious. I found a seat in the back. The room smelled of old paper and fresh coffee. It felt warm, like a hug. Poets walked up to the microphone one by one. Their words painted pictures in the air of heartbreak, hope, and healing. My chest tightened with every verse. And then the host smiled and asked, "Would anyone else like to share?" For a moment, I stared at my hands. My fingers were trembling slightly, but my heart was steady. I didn't plan to stand up, but somehow my feet carried me forward. I walked to the microphone. My hands were cold, but my voice was clear. I took a shaky breath and spoke. I used to think love was supposed to save me. I began softly, my voice barely above a whisper. But I was wrong. Love isn't meant to carry you, it's meant to walk beside you. The room fell quiet. I looked around, and suddenly, I wasn't afraid. I once gave my whole heart to someone, and when they left, I thought they took it with them. I thought I would never feel whole again. But I was wrong. My voice grew steadier, because my heart was never missing. It was here all along. I just needed time to find it again. A lump formed in my throat. My eyes stung, but I kept going. If you have ever felt broken by love, I hope you know this. You are not broken. You are still whole. Even if someone walked away, you still have a heart, and it is still capable of beating for someone else. But first, let it beat for you. I took a breath. The room was silent. I smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you." As I walked back to my seat, something unexpected happened. People clapped. Some even stood up. A woman in the front row wiped away her tears. A man by the window nodded, as if he understood every word. And at that moment, I realized that my story, the one filled with heartbreak and healing, wasn't just mine. It was theirs too. Because we all carry heartbreak. We all carry loss. But we also carry hope. After the event, a woman with gentle eyes walked up to me. She smiled shyly. "Your words, they were beautiful," she said softly. "I needed to hear them." I smiled back. "Thank you." We stood there for a moment, two strangers who suddenly felt connected. And then she said something I will never forget. "You made me believe in love again. Not in other people's love, but in my own." Her words stayed with me. I walked home that night with a full heart. I realized that maybe, just maybe, I had finally made peace with my past. A few weeks later, I found myself standing in front of the mirror again. The woman staring back at me was no longer the same. Her eyes were brighter. Her smile was softer. She no longer carried sadness in her reflection, she carried strength. And then, something surprising happened. I received a message. It was from Ryan. I stared at my phone, my fingers still. For a moment, I didn't breathe. I didn't feel fear or longing. I only felt calm. "Lily, I'm sorry for everything." The message read, "I regret how I treated you. I was lost, and I hurt you. I just want you to know. I still think about you. I miss you." I stared at the message for a long time, and then, without hesitation, I closed it. I didn't respond. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I simply smiled softly and put my phone away. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need him to miss me. I didn't need closure, because I had already given it to myself. I stood by my window again that evening, watching the stars. The same stars I had once stared at with a broken heart were now just beautiful lights in the sky. They no longer held pain, they held peace. And that night, I whispered a quiet thank you to Ryan, to the heartbreak, to the woman I had become because of it, because I knew, with all my heart, that I didn't regret marrying him anymore. I didn't regret loving him. I didn't regret the tears or the sorrow. I was grateful for it, because it shaped me. It made me stronger. It made me kinder. It made me whole. So, my dear listener, if you are holding on to someone who broke you, let them go. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with peace. You don't need them to say sorry.